The dusty sun of late afternoon settled gently over the wide-open plains as the small wagon rolled down the dirt road. The air smelled faintly of hay, warm dust, and the faraway promise of rain. Inside the wagon sat a young woman named Clara, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her dress was simple and clean, though worn at the edges, and on her feet were a pair of shoes that had seen better days, cracked at the toes and torn at the sides. She tried to hide them under her dress, but the rough road kept pulling the fabric away, revealing the truth of her long journey. Clara had come a long way from her small hometown. Her father was a farmer who had little to give but his blessing. When a letter came from a distant ranch offering marriage to a hard-working cowboy named Samuel Brooks, her father thought it a miracle. Samuel had heard of Clara through a family friend and had written to her father, promising her a home, a new beginning, and kindness. There was no talk of wealth, only of honesty and partnership. Clara had agreed not out of desperation, but because something in Samuel's word, on the way he spoke of open skies, quiet mornings, and shared work, felt sincere. The wagon jolted as it hit a rock, pulling Clara from her thoughts. She looked out at the horizon. The sky stretched endlessly, painted in orange and gold. A few cattle grazed lazily in the distance, and she could see a wooden house standing alone, framed by a small corral and a barn. That had to be the Brooks Ranch, her new home. Her heart thumped faster. She smoothed her hair, brushed the dust from her skirt, and whispered a quiet prayer. When the wagon stopped, the driver nodded toward the porch. "There he is," he said kindly. Clara followed his gaze and saw Samuel standing there, tall and steady, a gentle smile on his sun-warmed face. He looked exactly as she had imagined, broad shoulders, weathered hands, and kind eyes that spoke of years spent working under the open sky. His shirt was neatly pressed, though faded, his boots well-worn but clean. Samuel stepped forward as she climbed down from the wagon. For a moment, both simply looked at each other, strangers bound by a promise, unsure but hopeful. Clara lowered her eyes, her cheeks warm. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly. He smiled wider. "Samuel," he corrected. "You can call me Samuel now." His voice was deep and calm, like the sound of a slow river. She nodded, clutching her small bag. As she moved to step forward, one of her torn shoes caught on a rock, and the front split wider. She stumbled slightly, the fabric of her dress brushing against the ground. Embarrassment flushed her face. These shoes had carried her across miles, but now they gave out at the very end of her journey. Samuel saw it all. The worn fabric, the torn shoes, the young woman trying to hide her shame with grace. Instead of frowning, he chuckled softly, his eyes warm. He walked closer, kneeling slightly as if to inspect the damage. "Well," he said, his voice gentle, "you must have walked a long way to get here." Clara tried to smile, but her voice trembled. "I'm sorry. I should have—" He stopped her with a small shake of his head. "Don't apologize," he said. "You brought yourself here. That's all that matters." The way he said it, simple, sincere, made her heart ease. She felt something unspoken in his tone. A quiet understanding that life was rarely perfect, but kindness could make up for much. He stood again and offered his hand. "Come on, Clara, let's get you inside. You've brought all I ever needed." The words caught her by surprise. She looked up at him, unsure if he was teasing, but he wasn't. His eyes were steady, full of something she had never been looked at with before. Appreciation, not for what she wore or how she looked, but for who she was. As he led her toward the house, the boards creaked softly under their feet. The smell of freshly baked bread drifted from the open window, and a small dog barked from the barn. It was a simple home, not grand, not polished, but it felt alive. Flowers grew near the porch, the colors bright against the rough wood. Clara's chest filled with a strange warmth. She had feared this day for weeks, unsure if she'd belong, but now something told her she might. Inside, Samuel showed her the main room. A fire crackled softly in the stone hearth. The shelves were filled with books and little carvings of animals clearly handmade. "I carved those when the nights got long," he said with a small grin. Clara smiled back, running her fingers over one of the tiny horses. He brought her a cup of water and motioned toward a chair. "You must be tired," he said. "Rest for a bit." As she sat, her torn shoes peeked out again. She tried to tuck them under the chair, but Samuel noticed. He disappeared into the next room for a moment, then returned with a small wooden box. Opening it, he revealed a pair of soft leather boots, clearly used but well cared for. "They were my sister's," he said. She passed a few years back, but she'd be glad someone could use them. Clara hesitated. I couldn't possibly— You can, he said simply. You're part of this home now. The way he said home made her eyes sting with unexpected emotion. She took the boots gently, her fingers trembling a little. Thank you, Samuel, she whispered. He tipped his hat slightly. You've done more than you know, he said quietly. You came all this way, brave enough to start a new life with someone you'd never met. That kind of courage means more to me than gold. For a long moment, silence filled the room, warm and peaceful. Outside, the last light of day spread across the fields, turning everything soft and golden. Clara looked through the window at the endless land that would now be part of her story, her new beginning. That night, when the stars appeared, Clara stood by the window looking out. The house was still, the air cool. She could hear Samuel outside, humming softly as he checked on the horses. There was something comforting in the sound, the steady rhythm of a man who lived by his word. Clara touched the new boots resting beside her bed and smiled faintly. Her old torn shoes lay near the door, dusty and broken, yet she couldn't throw them away. They had carried her to the place where a stranger's kindness became the first light of hope in her new life. As she lay down to rest, she thought about his words. You've brought all I ever needed. They stayed with her, echoing softly in her heart. Maybe he didn't just mean her presence. Maybe he meant the simple faith that two people could build something good together, even from nothing. The night deepened, and the stars shimmered brighter over the quiet ranch. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, and a new rhythm of life. But for now, under that vast sky, Clara felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She had arrived as a bride with torn shoes, but she carried something far more valuable: strength, hope, and the promise of love that began not with riches, but with a smile and a kind word. The morning sun rose slowly over the wide plains, filling the Brooks Ranch with a soft golden light. Clara woke to the sound of roosters and the gentle clatter of hooves outside. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then she looked around the small wooden room, the handmade quilt and the faint smell of coffee drifting in through the open window. It was her new home. The thought made her heart beat faster. She got up quietly and dressed in the simple clothes she had packed from home. Her hands trembled slightly as she tied her hair back. Everything around her felt both strange and peaceful. She could hear Samuel outside, talking to the horses in a calm, steady voice. His words were low and kind, and though she couldn't make out all of them, she could hear the warmth in his tone. When she stepped outside, the air was fresh and cool. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, rolling fields, tall grass, and the blue line of distant hills. Samuel was standing near the barn, brushing one of the horses. He looked up when he saw her and smiled, a smile that made her nervousness fade just a little. Morning, he said, tipping his hat slightly. You sleep well? Yes, she said softly. I did. Thank you. He nodded toward the small porch. There's coffee on the table. Thought you might need it before we start the day. Clara smiled shyly and walked over to pour herself a cup. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it warmed her all the way down. She sat for a moment watching him work. Every movement he made was steady and sure. It was clear he loved this land and everything on it. After a while, Samuel came up to the porch and leaned against the railing. You don't have to work today, he said gently. You just got here. Take your time to rest and settle in. Clara shook her head with a small smile. I want to help. I can cook, clean, or whatever you need done. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, he said, if you insist. But take it easy. The ranch can be a hard life. Clara followed him to the barn, her heart lighter with every step. Inside, she saw rows of tools, stacks of hay, and a few cows grazing nearby. Everything smelled of earth, animals, and honest work. Samuel showed her how he fed the animals and checked their water. She listened carefully, asking quiet questions. He was patient, explaining things in simple words. After they finished, Samuel looked at her hands, small but steady, not afraid of a little dirt. You learn fast, he said. I grew up on a farm, she replied. Not this big, but I know how to work. He chuckled softly. Good, then you'll fit right in. Later they returned to the house and Clara began to explore the small kitchen. It was simple, a wooden table, a few shelves, and a stove that had seen many meals. She opened a few jars, finding flour, sugar, and dried beans. With quiet determination, she decided to make lunch for them both. While she worked, Samuel went back outside to fix the fence near the pasture. From the window, she could see him swinging the hammer, his movement strong and careful. Every time he paused to wipe his brow, she found herself watching him longer than she meant to. There was something comforting about his presence, like he carried a sense of peace wherever he went. When noon came, Clara brought out a simple meal: bread, beans, and soup. She set the table neatly and waited. Samuel came in soon after, washing his hands and sitting down across from her. For a few moments they ate in silence. Then he spoke, his tone thoughtful. "You know," he said slowly, "I wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't think anyone would actually come all the way out here." Clara looked up, curious. "Why not?" He shrugged lightly. "This land can be lonely. Most folks want something easier. But when I read your father's letter, something told me you might understand. You grew up working hard too, didn't you?" She nodded. "Yes, my family never had much, but we had each other. My father always said a good heart is better than gold." Samuel smiled at that. "He sounds like a wise man." They talked for a while, about her home, his ranch, and the small dreams they carried quietly in their hearts. The conversation flowed slowly, like a stream finding its path. Clara found herself laughing softly at some of his stories, and he seemed surprised by how easily she smiled. When the dishes were done, Samuel showed her around the rest of the ranch. There was a small chicken coop, a vegetable garden behind the barn, and a little pond that shimmered in the sunlight. Clara knelt by the water, touching it with her fingers. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. Samuel nodded. "It is. But it gets lonely sometimes." He glanced at her, his eyes thoughtful. Not anymore, though. Clara felt her cheeks grow warm. She looked away, pretending to study the flowers near the fence. She didn't know what to say. There was something gentle in his words, something that made her chest feel tight in a way she didn't quite understand yet. That evening, the two of them sat on the porch again, watching the sun go down. The sky turned red, then orange, then soft purple. The air was quiet except for the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Samuel leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee, while Clara sewed a small tear in her dress. "You know," he said after a while, "those shoes of yours, I fixed them a bit today. They won't last forever, but they should hold until we can get you a new pair." She looked up in surprise. "You fixed them?" He smiled. "Couldn't let your first day start with torn shoes, could I?" Her eyes softened, and for a moment neither spoke. The air between them felt full, not with words, but with quiet understanding. As the sky darkened, Samuel stood and lit a small lantern. "You must be tired," he said. "Tomorrow we'll head into town. It's a few miles away, but there's a store there. We'll get what we need." Clara nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had never been to this part of the country before, and the thought of seeing the town, the people, the market, maybe even a little church made her curious. When she went to bed that night, she lay awake for a long time, listening to the soft sounds of the ranch, the rustle of animals, the gentle creak of the house, and the distant hum of the wind. It felt strange and new, but it also felt safe. She thought about Samuel's smile, his calm voice, and the way he had said she brought all he ever needed. She didn't know yet what kind of life waited for her here, but something deep inside told her it might turn into something beautiful. Not a fairy tale, but a real honest story built on patience and care. Before sleep finally came, she whispered to herself, "Tomorrow will be better." Outside, under the quiet blanket of stars, Samuel stood by the fence looking toward the horizon. He could still see the faint light from her window. For the first time in years, he felt that the house wasn't empty anymore. The ranch, the land, and even the sky seemed somehow warmer. He smiled to himself and said softly into the night, "Welcome home, Clara." Then he turned toward the barn, his heart lighter than it had been in a long, long time. The next morning, Clara woke up before sunrise. The air was cool and still, and a pale light stretched slowly across the sky. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside quietly. The world looked peaceful. The fields were covered in soft mist, and the faint sound of horses came from the barn. She could smell the earth, the grass, and the clean scent of morning dew. For the first time since she left her home, she felt truly calm. Samuel was already awake, of course. She saw him near the corral, checking the fence line with his usual steady focus. When he noticed her, he waved and smiled. "You're up early," he said, walking toward her. "I couldn't sleep," she replied. "The morning is too beautiful to miss." He chuckled softly. "You sound like you've lived here all your life." Clara smiled shyly. "Maybe I'm starting to feel like I belong here." They shared a quiet look before Samuel gestured toward the barn. "We're heading to town today. It's about an hour's ride. You ready for your first trip?" Clara nodded, though she felt a flutter of nerves in her chest. She had never ridden such a long distance before, but she wanted to learn. Samuel brought out his gentle brown mare named Daisy and a smaller horse for Clara. "She's calm," he said, patting the animal's neck. "She'll take good care of you." Clara climbed onto the saddle carefully, her heart racing a little. Samuel rode beside her, keeping the pace slow. The morning light grew stronger as they traveled, turning the fields golden. Birds flew above them, and the sound of hooves against the soft ground filled the air. At first, Clara was quiet, focusing on keeping her balance. Samuel kept glancing over, giving her small words of encouragement. "You're doing just fine," he said. "Just trust the horse. Let her guide your rhythm." After a while, she relaxed enough to look around. The open plain seemed endless, and the sky stretched so wide that it made her feel small and free at the same time. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Samuel smiled. "That's what I love about this land. It reminds you that life can be simple and still be enough." When they reached the town, Clara's eyes widened with wonder. It wasn't a big place, but to her it felt lively and full of stories. There were wooden shops lined along the main street, a blacksmith hammering metal, and the smell of bread coming from a small bakery. People greeted Samuel as they passed, tipping their hats politely. "Morning, Sam," one man called from his wagon. "And who's this fine lady?" "This is Clara," Samuel said proudly. "My wife," the man smiled warmly. "Welcome, ma'am. You've got yourself a good man here." Clara blushed, murmuring a polite thank you. It felt strange and sweet to be introduced as someone's wife. They stopped at the general store, where Samuel helped her pick out a few things: fabric, flour, and some tools she might need in the kitchen. He also bought her a pair of new shoes. When she tried them on, the leather felt soft and comfortable. She looked down at them and smiled faintly. "These will last a long time," Samuel said. "But keep the old ones if you want. They tell a story." Clara looked up at him, touched by his words. "I'll keep them," she said softly. "They remind me of where I started." After shopping, Samuel took her to the small church at the edge of town. The old wooden building stood quietly among tall oak trees. "We don't have big crowds here," Samuel said, "but Pastor Reed keeps the doors open for anyone who needs a prayer." Clara walked inside and sat on one of the benches. The air was cool and still, filled with the faint scent of old wood and candles. She bowed her head and whispered a small prayer, not asking for riches or luck, but simply thanking God for kindness and peace. When she stepped outside, Samuel was waiting by the gate, his hat in his hands. "You all right?" he asked gently. "Yes," she said with a soft smile. "More than all right." They headed back toward the ranch as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Along the way, they talked more freely about her childhood, his memories of working the ranch with his late father, and their dreams for the future. Clara listened carefully, touched by how much Samuel had built with his own two hands. At one point, they stopped near a stream to rest the horses. Clara knelt by the water, splashing her hands and watching the ripples dance in the sunlight. Samuel sat on a rock nearby, looking at her quietly. She noticed his gaze and asked, "What is it?" He shook his head slightly, smiling. "Nothing. Just thinking how strange it feels, Wendy, to have someone here to share this quiet with." She looked down, feeling her cheeks warm. "I'm glad I came," she said softly, "even if I was scared at first." "You were brave," he replied. "Most wouldn't have taken that step." "You did." His words stayed with her the whole ride back. When they reached the ranch, the sky was painted with the soft colors of evening. Samuel helped her down from the horse, and for a brief moment their hands touched. It was a small thing, but it sent a quiet spark of warmth through both of them. That night they sat on the porch again, watching the stars appear. The land was silent except for the soft wind moving through the grass. Clara had cooked a simple dinner, cornbread and stew, and Samuel had praised it with a grin. "If you keep cooking like this," he said, "I'll never want to leave home again." She laughed softly. "Then I'll have to learn more recipes." He leaned back, his eyes fixed on the stars. I used to think life was just work and sleep. But since you came, it feels different, lighter." Clara's heart filled with quiet joy. Maybe that's what happens when you have someone to share it with. He looked at her then, his expression gentle. "Maybe you're right." A comfortable silence followed. The night was calm and the sound of crickets filled the air. Clara looked out at the land and her new world and felt grateful. Everything wasn't perfect, but it was real. Before going to bed, she took out her old shoes and placed them neatly near the door. They were still dusty, still torn, but now they didn't seem like a sign of hardship. They were proof of how far she had come. As she blew out the lamp, she thought about the day, the town, the kind faces, the ride through the golden fields, and she smiled. Life here was simple, but it was beautiful in its own quiet way. Samuel, sitting outside with his cup of coffee, looked at the same stars she was watching from the window. The wind brushed against the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance an owl hooted softly. He thought about Clara's laughter, her courage, and the peace she brought to his once lonely home. He took a deep breath, feeling something new stir in his heart. Not just gratitude, but a growing sense of affection. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew that the woman who arrived with torn shoes had already brought more light into his life than he ever expected. The ranch was quiet, but it was no longer lonely. For the first time in years, both of them slept with peaceful hearts, unaware that their simple story was slowly becoming something extraordinary, a bond built not on riches or promises, but on kindness, trust, and the quiet beauty of shared days. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, life on the ranch began to take on a steady rhythm. Clara was no longer the shy woman who had arrived with torn shoes. She had learned the ways of the land, how to milk the cows before sunrise, how to bake bread that stayed soft for days, and even how to help Samuel when he worked on the fence line. Her hands had become stronger, her heart calmer, and her laughter had started to fill the once silent house. Every morning, Samuel would find her already awake, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. Sometimes she would sing while sweeping the porch, her voice soft and clear. The simple tune carried through the air, blending with the sounds of birds and the wind. Samuel would pause for a moment, smiling to himself before getting back to his work. He had begun to depend on that sound. It made the long hours easier. One bright morning, Clara was out in the garden planting seeds. The soil was warm under her hands, and she enjoyed the feeling of life stirring beneath it. Samuel came over carrying a wooden bucket. "You've got quite a green thumb," he said with a grin. "Those flowers are growing better than I ever managed." She wiped her hands on her apron and looked up at him. "Maybe they just needed a little kindness," she replied playfully. Samuel chuckled. "Then I'd say you're exactly what this place needed." They worked side by side for a while, talking about small things, the weather, the crops, and the animals. It was simple, but it felt right. There was a quiet comfort between them, the kind that comes when two people understand each other without needing many words. After lunch, clouds began to gather in the distance. The wind picked up, rustling the trees near the barn. Samuel looked at the sky and frowned slightly. "Storm's coming," he said. "We'd better bring the animals in and cover the supplies." Without hesitation, Clara followed him outside. Together they worked quickly, tying down the barrels, closing the barn doors, and making sure the animals were safe. The first drops of rain began to fall as they finished. Within minutes, the sky opened up and heavy rain poured down. They ran toward the porch, laughing breathlessly as the storm roared around them. Clara's hair clung to her face and her dress was damp, but her eyes sparkled with life. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, his heart filled with something deeper than he could explain. She had brought light into his quiet world, laughter where there had once been only silence. When the rain didn't stop, they sat together on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the storm. The thunder rolled across the fields and the scent of rain filled the air. "It's strange," Clara said softly, "how the storm can be so loud and beautiful at the same time." Samuel nodded. "That's how life is. It can break things, but it also brings new beginnings." She turned to look at him, her eyes full of thought. "Do you ever feel lonely here anymore?" He hesitated, then shook his head slowly. "Not since you came." The way he said it was quiet but sure, and Clara felt her heart beat faster. She looked away quickly, pretending to focus on the rain, but she could still feel his gaze on her. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was gentle, filled with the unspoken connection that had grown between them. By evening, the rain finally stopped. The air was cool and fresh, and the sky had turned a deep shade of purple. Samuel stood and stretched his arms. "Looks like the storm did us a favor," he said. "The land needed that rain," Clara smiled. "And I think the flowers will be happier now." Over the next few days, everything seemed to grow greener and brighter. The grass shimmered and the air carried the scent of new life. Clara spent her mornings tending to the garden, while Samuel worked on the fences and the fields. In the evenings, they shared quiet dinners and long talks. Sometimes Clara would tell him stories about her childhood, about her father, her small village, and the little joys of her old life. Samuel listened carefully, often smiling at her simple memories. In return, he told her about his past, how he had taken over the ranch after his father's passing, how the long nights used to feel endless, and how he had almost given up hope of ever having company again. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Samuel said quietly, "You've changed this place, Clara. I didn't realize how empty it was until you filled it with life again." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "You've given me a home, Samuel. That's something I never thought I'd find." The words hung between them, tender and true. A few days later, the town was holding a small gathering, a harvest festival to celebrate the end of the planting season. Samuel asked Clara if she'd like to go. She hesitated at first, worried she might not fit in with the townsfolk, but Samuel smiled and said, "You'll do just fine. They'll love you." On the day of the festival, Clara wore the blue dress she had sewn herself and her new shoes. Samuel looked at her and felt a quiet pride rise in his chest. "You look beautiful," he said simply. She blushed and laughed softly. "You don't look too bad yourself, Mr. Brooks." At the festival, the townspeople welcomed them warmly. There was music, food, and laughter everywhere. Clara danced with some of the local women, her laughter ringing through the air. Samuel stood nearby, watching her with a smile. He had never seen her so full of joy. Later that evening, as the music slowed, Samuel offered his hand. "May I?" he asked. Clara hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. They danced under the string of lanterns, the golden light reflecting off their faces. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The world around them faded away, the chatter, the music, the laughter, until there was only the sound of their hearts beating softly in time. When the night ended, they rode home under the stars. The air was cool and the land was silent except for the steady sound of the horses. Clara looked up at the sky and whispered, "It feels like the stars are closer out here." Samuel smiled. "Maybe they're shining brighter for us tonight." When they reached the ranch, the moonlight washed over the fields, making them glow silver. Samuel helped Clara down from the horse. For a moment, they stood there, close but not speaking. The night was still, and everything around them seemed to hold its breath. "Thank you," Clara said softly, "for bringing me here, for giving me a life I never dreamed of." Samuel looked at her, his voice low. "No, Clara, you gave me a life I never dreamed of." Her eyes shimmered in the moonlight, and she smiled, a gentle, grateful smile that said more than words ever could. That night, as they went inside, the house felt different, warmer, brighter. The laughter and light from the festival seemed to follow them in. Clara sat by the window before going to bed, watching the moon drift across the sky. She thought about the road that had brought her here, the long journey, the torn shoes, the uncertain beginning, and how it had all led her to this quiet, beautiful place. Outside, Samuel checked the barn one last time before turning in. He looked at the house, its windows glowing softly, and felt peace settle over him like the cool night air. They didn't say it yet, but both of them knew. Something deeper than companionship had taken root between them. Like the seeds Clara planted in the soil, it had grown slowly, quietly, and beautifully. The land slept peacefully under the stars, and inside that small wooden house, two hearts rested side by side, no longer strangers but partners in a story that was only just beginning to bloom. The mornings on the ranch had taken on a comforting rhythm. Clara woke to the soft sounds of birds singing and the gentle movement of the horses in the corral. She stretched, feeling the warmth of the sun spilling through the window, and a quiet sense of peace settled over her. It had been months since she had arrived with torn shoes, uncertain of what awaited her, and yet now every corner of the ranch felt like home. Samuel was already outside, leaning against the fence with a cup of coffee in his hands. The sun had just begun to rise, casting golden light over the fields. When he saw Clara step onto the porch, he smiled. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied softly, returning the smile. The two of them shared a moment of quiet, drinking in the gentle beauty of the morning. Samuel often thought about how different life had been before she came, the long, silent nights, the emptiness that stretched across the ranch. Clara had changed all that. Her laughter, her energy, her care for the animals and the land, they had brought life back into a place that had known too much quiet. After breakfast, Samuel suggested they go out to the far fields to check the cattle. Clara readily agreed, enjoying the ride across the wide-open land. Daisy, Samuel's mare, trotted steadily beside Clara's horse, who had grown calm and confident under her care. The wind was cool against their faces, carrying the scent of fresh grass and earth. Along the way, they spoke little, content to enjoy the quiet together. Occasionally, Samuel would glance at her and smile, catching her hand as it brushed against the reins. Clara felt a warmth in her chest, realizing how natural it had become to be by his side. The unease she had felt when she first arrived was long gone, replaced by a steady confidence and a quiet happiness she had never known. When they reached the far fields, the cattle grazed peacefully. Samuel dismounted and walked over to check the fences, while Clara followed, helping to mend any weak spots she found. Her hands moved skillfully, and Samuel watched her with a quiet admiration. "You've learned fast," he said. Clara laughed softly. "I had a good teacher." He smiled, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Maybe, but you've got a natural touch. The land seems to like you." They worked together for hours, repairing fences, checking the animals, and making sure everything was secure. By the time they finished, the sun was high in the sky and the air was warm. They paused under the shade of a large oak tree, resting and enjoying the view. The field stretched endlessly, golden and green, dotted with grazing cattle and wildflowers. Samuel handed Clara a water bottle, and she drank gratefully. "You know," he said after a moment, "I used to think I could do this all alone. I was wrong." Clara looked at him, curiosity in her eyes. "Wrong?" "Yes," he replied. "I didn't realize how much life could be missing when you don't have someone to share it with." Her cheeks warmed, and she looked away, pretending to study the distant hills. "I feel the same," she admitted softly. "When I left home, I was scared of the unknown, but now, I can't imagine being anywhere else." Samuel reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. "More than you know." Clara felt her heart swell. There was something about the way he said it, steady, sincere, and free of pretense, that made her trust him completely. For the first time in her life, she felt that she was exactly where she belonged. Later, they returned to the house for lunch. Clara prepared a simple meal, while Samuel fetched fresh eggs from the coop. They ate together on the porch, enjoying the warm sunlight and the soft hum of the ranch. Clara found herself watching Samuel as he ate, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled and the gentle way he treated the animals. She realized she had fallen in love with this man, not because of grand gestures or words, but because of the quiet strength and kindness that defined him. After lunch, Samuel suggested they take a short walk to the river that ran along the edge of the property. The path was shaded by tall trees, and the air smelled of water and fresh leaves. Clara held Samuel's hand as they walked, enjoying the simple closeness of their connection. When they reached the river, they stopped to rest. Clara dipped her fingers into the cool water, watching the ripples spread across the surface. Samuel knelt beside her, tossing small pebbles into the stream and smiling as they skipped across the water. "You know," he said after a while, "I never thought I'd find someone who could make this place feel like home." Clara looked at him, her eyes soft. "And yet here I am." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "You've brought everything I didn't even know I needed," he said. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that touched Clara deeply. She leaned closer, resting her head against his shoulder for a moment. The quiet of the river, the soft rustle of leaves, and the warmth of Samuel's presence made her feel safe in a way she had never known. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they made their way back to the ranch. The air was cool, and the shadows stretched long across the fields. Clara felt a sense of peace that she had never experienced before, a life full of simple joys, honest work, and shared moments with someone she trusted completely. That evening, after supper, they sat together on the porch again. The stars began to appear, twinkling brightly in the clear night sky. Samuel handed Clara a small lantern, and she held it carefully, watching the soft light dance across the wooden boards. "You've made this place brighter," he said quietly, his voice full of warmth. "I used to think I knew what I wanted, but now I realize I didn't until you arrived." Clara felt tears welling in her eyes. She smiled softly, reaching out to touch his hand. "I feel the same. You've given me a life I never imagined, one filled with peace and kindness. I'm grateful for every moment." They sat in silence for a while, letting the quiet night surround them. The only sounds were the gentle hum of crickets and the occasional soft neigh of a horse in the barn. It was a silence filled not with emptiness, but with understanding, trust, and unspoken love. As the night deepened, Samuel stood and offered his hand. "Come on, let's head inside. You need rest, and tomorrow will bring another full day." Clara took his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch, and they walked inside together. The house was quiet, but the glow from the fireplace made it feel cozy and alive. Clara prepared for bed, placing her old torn shoes neatly beside the door. They had carried her through the journey that led her here, and she kept them as a reminder of how far she had come. As she lay in bed, she thought about the days that had passed, the work, the storms, the festival in town, and the quiet evenings with Samuel. She realized that her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. She had come to the ranch unsure and timid, and now she felt strong, confident, and loved. Samuel checked the barn one last time before heading to bed. He paused by Clara's window, looking at the soft light spilling out. He thought about the journey that had brought her here, the courage it took to leave home, the strength it took to travel so far, and the kindness that had guided her along the way. He whispered quietly to himself, "You've brought all I ever needed." Clara, hearing the gentle tone of his voice, smiled in the darkness. She knew he was right. They had both found something precious, not wealth or grandeur, but trust, companionship, and the quiet, steadfast love that grows slowly and surely. In the days that followed, their bond deepened. Clara continued to care for the house, the animals, and the land, while Samuel worked alongside her, teaching and learning together. Every day brought small joys. A meal cooked just right, a fence repaired, a flower blooming in the garden. Every day brought them closer, their hearts entwining in ways both simple and profound. And so, the ranch that had once been quiet and lonely became alive with warmth, laughter, and hope. Clara, the young bride who had arrived with torn shoes, had found her place, her purpose, and her love. Samuel had found more than a companion. He had found someone who made his life complete. Under the wide-open sky, with the stars shining above and the land stretching endlessly around them, they knew that their journey had only just begun. But for the first time, both of them felt certain of one thing. Together they had everything they could ever need. And in that quiet, golden world of fields, animals, and shared work, they finally understood the true meaning of home, a place filled with love, kindness, and the promise of a lifetime spent side by side.